Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here to react to the movie My Dinner with Andre, and we're going to do some character analysis. And so this video is also to promote our upcoming course, Action, Typology, and Fiction. In that, we will be pointing out cognitive function use and other type-related factors in movies and TV shows to give people a guide of how it looks like to see functions in action. And so we'll be giving you a little taste of that in today's video. And I'll let Jonathan explain what we'll be watching.
So today we're going to be watching the 1981 film My Dinner with Andre. The plot is that two guys go to a restaurant and have a conversation. That's it. That's the whole movie. It's just a very interesting conversation. And we're going to show about 30 minutes from the film. We're going to stop every 5 minutes to explain what we're seeing. And this will allow us to explore these characters in a little more depth and perhaps show a bit more than usual. Okay?
Because you have to learn now. It didn't used to be necessary, but today you have to learn something like, are you really hungry or are you just stuffing your face? Because that's what you do out of habit. I mean, you can afford to do it, so you do it, whether you're hungry or not. You know, if you go to the Buddhist meditation center, they make you taste each bite of your food, so it takes 2 hours. It's horrible to eat your lunch, but you're conscious of the taste of your food. If you're just eating out of habit, then you don't taste the food, and you're not conscious of the reality of what's happening to you. You enter the dream world again.
Now, do you think maybe we live in this dream world because we do so many things every day that affect us in ways that somehow we're just not aware of? You know, I was thinking, now last Christmas, Debbie and I were given an electric blanket. And I can tell you that it is just such a marvelous advance over our old way of life, and it is just great. But it is quite different from not having an electric blanket. And I sometimes sort of wonder, well, what is it doing to me? I mean, I sort of feel I'm not sleeping quite in the same way.
No, you wouldn't be.
I mean, and my dreams are sort of different. And I feel a little bit different when I get up in the morning.
I wouldn't put an electric blanket on for anything.
So as you see here, both the men are having a very philosophical discussion. And so you'll get to see how different functions approach this kind of conversation. And you'll see the different angles that can be taken in this film. And so the man on the left is starting to reference a few of his experiences, namely the electric blanket, as he's talking about. And so you can see a little bit of introverted sensing. And on the right, there is this man making someone question their reality, like, is reality even real? Or here are these facets of reality, and trying to get you to question your everyday. You're seeing a lot of speculating, you're seeing a lot of guessing. You can see that there's hypothesizing, and so there's intuition going on. And so this film in general is very NESI because there's a lot of talking and it's very verbal. It goes on many tangents and differing ideas throughout this entire movie too. So it's a lot of extroverted intuition.
Yeah, so for context, both of these men are playwrights. Wallace Shawn on the left, the bald guy, he's been invited to this restaurant by Andre, who is an old friend he hasn't seen in a long time. Andre is a famous theatre director who had a bit of a midlife crisis and slowly disappeared and traveled the world. And now he's come back and he's invited Wally to this restaurant to tell him all about his experiences and all of his insights and to get Wallace Shawn's opinion on the whole thing, because Wallace Shawn's quite a different person. Wallace Shawn's showing a lot more self-preservation on the Enneagram. He's very showing a lot of introverted sensing when he's referencing the electric blankets. He's talking about his creature comforts. We'll see a bit more of their different outlooks on life through the rest of this clip. Keep in mind they are both playwrights, so this is kind of a artistic conversation, but even though both of them are in the same profession, they have quite different ideas of what their job entails and what they're trying to do. So let's go on.
First, I'd be worried I might get electrocuted. No, I don't trust technology. But I mean, the main thing, Wally, is that I think that kind of comfort just separates you from reality in a very direct way.
You mean?
I mean, if you don't have that electric blanket and your apartment is cold and you need to put on another blanket or go into the closet and pile up coats on top of the blanket you have, well, then you know it's cold. And that sets up a link of things. You have compassion for what is the person next to you cold? Are there other people in the world who are cold? What a cold night. I like the cold. My God, I never realized. I don't want a blanket. It's fun being cold. I can snuggle up against you even more because it's cold. All sorts of things occur to you. turn on that electric blanket and it's like taking a tranquilizer. It's like being lobotomized by watching television. I think you enter the dream world again. I mean, what does it do to us, Wally, living in an environment where something as massive as the seasons or winter or cold don't in any way affect us? I mean, we're animals after all. I mean, what does that mean? I think that means that instead of living under the sun and the moon and the sky and the stars, we're living in a fantasy world of our own making.
Yeah, but I mean, I would never give up my electric blanket, Andre. I mean,
Yeah, one thing I notice is that Andre, throughout these clips, he will ask a question and then he'll give himself the answer. It's like he really genuinely wants the other person to respond and get their opinion, but at the same time, just asking the question almost like sparks an idea in his head and sends him on a new tangent. Andre is definitely the more talkative of the two here, and he's thinking a lot about other people and what new technology and innovation is doing to us as human beings and how it's affecting our ability to relate to each other. So he's not just an intuitive, he seems more like an NF in particular, probably some kind of ENF, probably an ENFP, because his idea of getting insights is to travel the world and get new experiences and then talk about his experiences with an old friend. And it's all about how we relate to each other and how we're showing concern for each other and whether new technology is affecting us in a positive way or a negative way.
Yeah, so for the guy on the right, he is very much pondering the implications of technology and what it means about our reality. And he's asking all of these questions like, can we really trust our reality? Is it really real? And questioning everything. And so as he's talking, he's actually coming up with answers to his questions, which creates more questions, as Jonathan was talking about. And so there is this process of extroverted intuition that you see a lot here from the guy on the right.
Yeah, and it's not just his question of reality, it's that he thinks that we're losing touch with reality, we're losing touch with the higher or deeper sense of reality. New technology is bringing us further away from reality and more into this fake reality, which is very much a sort of intuitive way of viewing the world.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas the guy on the left is talking about, but I like my blanket. And so he's like, why should I question my creature comforts? I enjoy these. And so you can see more introverted sensing.
Mhm.
because New York is cold in the winter. I mean, our apartment is cold. It's a difficult environment. I mean, our lives are tough enough as it is. I'm not looking for ways to get rid of the few things that provide relief and comfort. I mean, on the contrary, I'm looking for more comfort because the world is very abrasive. I mean, I'm trying to protect myself because really there are these abrasive beatings to be avoided everywhere you look.
Yeah, but Wally, don't you see that comfort can be dangerous? I mean, you like to be comfortable and I like to be comfortable too, but comfort can lull you into a dangerous tranquility. I mean, my mother knew a woman, Lady Hatfield, who was one of the richest women in the world, and she died of starvation because all she would eat was chicken. I mean, she just liked chicken, Wally, and that was all she would eat. And actually, her body was starving, but she didn't know it because she was quite happy eating her chicken, and so she finally died. See, I honestly believe that we're all like Lady Hatfield now. We're having a lovely, comfortable time with our electric blankets and our chicken, and meanwhile, we're starving because we're so cut off from contact with reality that we're not getting any real sustenance because we don't see the world. We don't see ourselves. We don't see how our actions affect other people. Have you read Martin Buber's book on Hasidism?
No.
Oh, well, here's the view of life. He talks about the belief of the Hasidic Jews that there's spirits chained in everything. There are spirits chained in you, there's spirits chained in me, there's spirits chained in this table. And that prayer is the action of liberating these enchained embryo-like spirits, and that every action of ours in life, whether it's doing business or making love or having dinner together, whatever, that every action of ours should be a prayer, a sacrament in the world. Now, do you think we're living like that? Why do you think we're not living like that? I think it's because if we allowed ourselves to see what we do every day, we might just find it too nauseating. I mean, the way we treat other people. I mean, every day, several times a day, I walk into my apartment building, the doorman calls me Mr. Gregory, and I call him Jimmy. Already, what's the difference between that and the Southern plantation owner who's got slaves? See, I think that an act of murder is committed in that moment when I walk into that building. Because here's a dignified, intelligent man, a man of my own age, and when I call him Jimmy, then he becomes a child, and I'm an adult because I can buy my way into the building.
Right, that's right. I mean,
And so you can see in this clip, the guy on the right, he talks about how these concepts, they impact people, they can hurt people, and the emphasis on human welfare and how these concepts impact human potential is very NF. And you also see a lot of the extroverted intuition and introverted sensing and how he's referencing different sources. And so the guy on the right, he talks about this book that he's been reading and how that sparked so many ideas in him. And so with extroverted intuition, they can have this one thing that sparks endless amount of ideas. And so they're exploring these ideas in real time in conversation. And so extroverted intuition tends to want to discuss ideas in real time. And you can see this in the guy on the right, where he's talking about this idea that was inspired by a book that he read. And then he goes on a thought trail. And so he's super excited about it. Something I find so great about extroverted intuition is that there's this enthusiasm and excitement as they're talking about ideas. They're so eager, they actually get more and more pumped as they're going and diving into an idea. And you could see that fascination growing and growing as he's talking about this concept and diving more deeply. So Jonathan is imitating the guy on the left's face. There's some sort of, I don't know if it's skepticism or it's, okay, that's an interesting thought. I've never thought of that before. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that the guy on the left is exemplifying introverted sensing. And if you were to guess at his type, he's probably an introverted sensing dominant. And so you can see that in the strength of the SI. It's in everything he says. You can hear a level of being skeptical of the intuitive jumps the guy on the right is making. And he's like, okay, I can see what you're saying, but I don't know if I fully buy it yet until the real world tells me that that's true.
He is skeptical, but he's also intrigued at the same time. So that's also speaks to SI Dom, because it's like his inferior intuition is being stimulated. He's not entirely sure what to make of this. He is intrigued by it, though, as we'll see, and he is agreeing with some of it. We're also seeing introverted intuition in Andre, the other guy, because he's referencing a lot of past events. He's referencing like someone that his mother knew and something that she went through and how she starved herself to death because she was eating the same thing all the time. Actually, that lady Hatfield he was talking about is probably also an introverted sensing type who was just eating the same food over and over again until she died. And he's referencing, books he's read, experiences he's had, and trying to manifest them as ideas. Take complex lessons from sometimes quite complex ideas and sometimes quite mundane experiences. And he has talked about how he likes to be comfortable, but he is more suspicious of comfort than Wallace Shawn's character. Wallace Shawn's character likes to be comfortable, as he said. He is also likely a self-preservation type in the Enneagram. But Andre, he likes to be comfortable, but he's worried about what this is doing to people, to himself and to everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the next part we'll get into is how they're both playwrights and how they both have different ideas of what the theatre is supposed to be doing, what kind of stories they want to tell, which will also show a bit more of the type.
My God, when I was a Latin teacher, people used to treat me. If I would go to a party of professional or literary people, I was just treated, in the nicest sense of the word, like a dog. In other words, there's no question of my being able to participate on an equal basis in the conversation with people. I'd occasionally have conversations with people, but then when they asked what I did, which would always happen after about 5 minutes, their faces, even if they were enjoying the conversation or they were flirting with me or whatever it was, their faces would just have that expression, just like the portcullis crashing down, those medieval gates. They would just walk away. I literally lived like a dog. And when Debbie was working as a secretary, if she would tell people what she did, they would just go insane. It would be just as if she'd said, I've been serving a life sentence recently for child murdering. My God, when you talk about our attitudes toward other people, I think of myself as just a very decent, good person, just because I think I'm reasonably friendly to most of the people I happen to meet every day. I really think of myself quite smugly. I just think I'm a perfectly nice guy, so long as I think of the world as consisting of, just a small circle of the people that I know as friends or the few people that we know in this little world of our little hobbies, the theater or whatever it is. And I'm really quite self-satisfied. I'm just quite happy with myself. I just have no complaint about myself. Let's face it. There's a whole enormous world out there that I just don't ever think about. And I certainly don't take responsibility for how I've lived in that world. I mean, if I were actually to sort of confront the fact that I'm sort of sharing this stage with a starving person in Africa somewhere, well, I wouldn't feel so great about myself. So naturally, I just blot all those people right out of my perception. So of course, I'm ignoring a whole section of the real world. But frankly, when I write a play, in a way, one of the things I think I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring myself up against some little bits of reality, and I'm trying to share that with an audience. I mean, of course, we all know the theater is in terrible shape today. I mean, at least a few years ago, people who really cared about the theater used to say the theater is dead, and now everybody's redefined the theater in such a trivial way that God, I know people who are involved with the theater who go to see things now that, a few years ago, these same people would have just been embarrassed to have even seen some of these plays. I mean, they would have just shrunk, just in horror at the superficiality of these things. But now they say, oh, that was pretty good. It's just incredible. And I really just find that attitude unbearable, because I really do think the theater can do something very important. I mean, I do think the theater can help bring people in contact with reality. Now you may not feel that at all. I mean, you may just find that totally absurd.
And so you'll see the guy on the left, he talks about theater, it brings people to reality. And so I find that to be a very grounding statement. And so I'm like, it's like bringing everything back to the sensory. Theater reminds people of the sensory. They remind people of real life. And so you can also see him talking about the real reactions of people in his life. So this is him providing more examples as he's going throughout this show. So he's talking about things that have actually happened and how that's impacting, and his thoughts on that. And so you'll see a lot of grounding in the sensory.
Yeah, he does show a bit of FI here. It seems like FE in that he says he considers himself a good, kind, decent person to other people. But he also admits that this is in terms of he's thinking of the people in his own little circle. He doesn't normally think about the wider world. Doesn't always think about people suffering in some other continent. He just thinks he's nice, kind, and pleasant to everyone he meets. He also shows a bit of paranoia. The way he's talking about how other people react to him when he tells them what their job are. He goes straight to hierarchy and how he feels put down and treated like a dog, in his own words, and how he feels his wife was also treated like a child murderer. These are probably exaggerations rather than things that actually happened, but it feels like he's being looked down for his low career. And he is a playwright, but he also worked as a Latin teacher, and it feels like he's not being taken seriously by more upper class, more established intellectual types, and he wants their respect as a very stereotypical SJ desire to be respected by those above you in the hierarchy, and to know you and to have a decent place in the hierarchy, and a fear of being looked down upon and disrespected. Regarding his plays, he talks about how he's tried to challenge himself by being more aware of the wider world. He's still talking about reality, though. He wants his plays to reflect the real world and to show him other parts of the real world they may not be thinking about. And it's like he's trying to reconcile his sensory personality with his interests, because he's a little bit different for an SJ in that he is involved in playwriting. He is involved in the arts, in the world of creative theatre. So he's a little bit atypical as far as an SJ goes, but he's still approaching the theatre and the arts in a very SJ way. Okay?
Yeah, but Wally, don't you see the dilemma? You're not taking into account the period we're living in. I mean, of course that's what the theater should do. I mean, I've always felt that. When I was a young director and I directed the Bacchae at Yale, my impulse when Pentheus has been killed by his mother and the Furies, and they pull the tree back and they tie him to the tree and fling him into the air, and he flies through space and he's killed and they rip him to shreds and I guess cut off his head. My impulse was the thing to do was to get a head from the New Haven morgue and pass it around the audience. Now, I wanted Agawe to bring on a real head, and that this head should be passed around the audience so that somehow people realized that this stuff was real, see, that it was real stuff. Now, the actress playing Agawe absolutely refused to do it. Gordon Craig used to talk about, why is there gold or silver in the churches or something? The great cathedrals, when actors could be wearing gold and silver. And I mean, people who saw Eleanor Duse in the last couple of years of her life, Wally, people said that it was like seeing light on stage or mist or the essence of something. I mean, then when you think about Bertolt Brecht, he somehow created a theater in which people could observe, that was vastly entertaining and exciting, but in which the excitement didn't overwhelm you. He somehow allowed you the distance between the play and yourself, in fact, two human beings need in order to live together. The question is whether the theater now can do for an audience what Brecht tried to do or what Craig or Duza tried to do. Can it do it now? You see, I think the people today are so deeply asleep, unless, you're putting on those sort of superficial plays that just help your audience to sleep more comfortably, it's very hard to know what to do in the theater. Because you see, I think that if you put on serious contemporary plays by writers like yourself, you may only be helping to deaden the audience in a different way.
What do you mean?
Well, Wally, how does it affect an audience to put on one of these plays in which you show that people are totally isolated now and they can't reach each other and their lives are desperate? Or how does it affect them to see a play that shows that our world is full of nothing but shocking sexual events and terror and violence? Does that help to wake up a sleeping audience? See, I don't think so. Because I think it's very likely that the picture of the world that you're showing them in a play like that is exactly the picture of the world they have already. They know their own lives and relationships are difficult and painful. If they watch the evening news on television, well, there what they see is a terrifying, chaotic universe full of rapes and murders and hands cut off by subway cars and children pushing their parents out of windows. So the play tells them that their impression of the world is correct and that there's absolutely no way out. There's nothing they can do. And they end up feeling passive and impotent. Look at something like that christening that my group arranged for me in the forest of Poland. Well, there was an example of something that really had all the elements of theater. It was worked on carefully, was thought about carefully, was done with exquisite taste and magic. And they, in fact, created something. In this case, was in a way just for an audience of one, just for me. But they created something that had ritual, love, surprise, denouement, beginning, middle, and end, and was an incredibly beautiful piece of theater. And the impact that it had on its audience on me was somehow a totally positive one. It didn't deaden me, it brought me to life.
Yeah, but are you saying that it's impossible? Isn't it a little upsetting to come to the conclusion that there's no way to wake people up anymore except to involve them in some kind of a strange christening in Poland or some kind of a strange experience on top of Mount Everest?
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is we've got two playwrights who are both trying to help their audience get more in touch with reality, but they have completely different ideas of what reality is. So for Wallace Shawn's character, it's more the one on the left. It's more what is real. It's more contemporary stuff, more about being aware of different aspects, different sides of life. It's different parts of the world. That's what he's thinking of. That people perhaps haven't come into contact with. Whereas Andre, he's thinking like more conceptual, abstract stuff, more about bringing people in contact with things they haven't really thought about. He's worried that if you're too contemporary, if you're too grounded in your approach to art, then you're almost taking people away from the real world in a sense, like you're sort of reinforcing their stereotypes and prejudices and assumptions about real life rather than challenging them and making them think about other things or things they've forgotten about because the real world has taken them, the modern world, the contemporary world has taken them out of contact with what it means to be a real person, like how we've been historically for thousands of years. He's also, again, you see a lot of like asking rhetorical questions and like going off on tangents and referring to all these strange, unusual experiences he's had, like how he had a christening in Poland, a strange ritual. That was all there. I should also add that this is based on a play that these two men wrote, and they have, in fact, done versions of the play where they've swapped roles, where one actor is doing the other person's part. So even though they're playing versions of themselves, this is still acting. So that's just a thing to keep in mind.
And so you can see that the guy on the right, he talks about people need to have the ability to question things. He doesn't like how these ideas reinforce people's realities, and so they stay stuck in that reality. And I also think a part of this comes from their EP nature, where they don't want to be trapped. They don't want to feel controlled. And so if we keep reinforcing these ideas for people to think, I feel controlled, bro. Like, don't control me, bro. Don't control my thoughts, bro. And to me, that points also to NE dominant. So the desire to not want to be trapped or confined by reinforcing people's reality. And so let's question it. Let's inspire people to think for themselves. There's an element of independence and autonomy that he wants people to have that he feels like the culture is taking away from, that people could have. He almost treats playwriting as a springboard for other things too. And so you can see that the playwright is to springboard ideas in people, is to springboard ideas for people to think more deeply about. So there's a lot of any dominance there.
Yeah, but I mean, are you saying that it's impossible? I mean, isn't it a little upsetting to come to the conclusion that there's no way to wake people up anymore except to involve them in some kind of a strange christening in Poland or some kind of a strange experience on top of Mount Everest? I mean, because the awful thing is, if you really say that it's necessary to take everybody to Everest, it's really tough because everybody can't be taken to Everest. I mean, there must have been periods in history when it would have been possible to save the patient through less drastic measures. I mean, there must have been periods when, in order to give people a strong or a meaningful experience, you wouldn't actually have to take them to Everest.
But you do now. In some way or other, you do now.
I mean, there was a time when you could have just, for instance, written, I don't know, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, and I'm sure the people who read it had a pretty strong experience. I'm sure they did. I mean, all right, now you're saying that people today wouldn't get it. Maybe that's true, but I mean, isn't there any kind of writing or any kind of a play? I mean, isn't it still legitimate for writers to try to portray reality so that people can see it? I mean, really, tell me, why do we require a trip to Mount Everest in order to be able to perceive one moment of reality? I mean, is Mount Everest more real than New York? I mean, isn't New York real? I mean, you see, I think if you could become fully aware of what existed in the cigar store next door to this restaurant, I think it would just blow your brains out. I mean, isn't there just as much reality to be perceived in the cigar store as there is on Mount Everest? I mean, what do you think? You see, I think that not only is there nothing more real about Mount Everest, I think there's nothing that different in a certain way. I mean, because reality is uniform in a way, so that if your perceptions are, if your own mechanism is operating correctly, it would become irrelevant to go to Mount Everest and sort of absurd because of course, on some level, obviously it's very different from a cigar store on 7th Avenue. But
Well, I agree with you, Wally. But the problem is that people can't see the cigar store now.
I will say for the guy on the left, there is a lot of hypotheticals here that I will say that the way he approaches it is very introverted sensing. And so he talks about the logistics of being on the mountain. He's like, how can you get all those people up there though? Is that even possible? I don't think it's possible. And then he starts talking about that. So you could interpret that as this is introverted sensing and possibly extroverted thinking, noticing that it's not possible to do certain things. Like you're giving an idea that doesn't actually work in reality. And so I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah. What he's doing here is he is going into his extroverted intuition. He is talking about like Andre is like asking questions and rhetorical questions, giving answers. He's panicking. He's panicking about, you can start to see him reacting against all the extroverted intuition, all the ideas that he's been listening to for this entire film. He's been really intrigued, but he's also beginning to be a bit scared because he doesn't like the implications of this. Because what Andre is saying is that in order to have real, deep human experiences, you need to really go out of your way nowadays. You need to really travel to foreign countries and have strange experiences, or you need to climb Mount Everest and bring yourself in full contact with nature. And this is very upsetting to Wallace Shawn's character because he thinks that the world he's in right now is the real world, and the world he's in right now has all these immediate sensory experiences that he likes and these creature comforts that he likes and enjoys, and he doesn't like the idea that everything he's doing is just meaningless and purposeless and has no value at all, and he needs to do some wild, crazy things in order to actually be a real person. He finds it a little bit frightening and a little bit insulting, perhaps. It's not at all how Andre, the other guy, intends for him to be taken, but as the fear that's going through what Shawn said. So in addition to being an SJ, he's almost certainly a self-preservation 6. You can see that in the sense that self-pres 6 is often in the Enneagram. Self-pres 6s often think that they are kind, warm, generous people, as he mentioned earlier, and they do have an underlying anxiety, and they like to have a sense of security and familiarity that calms their anxiety. It's very, very common for SJs to either be 6 or have 6 very strong in there.
And so you could see the guy on the left, as Jonathan said, he looks very anxious and panicked, seeing that, oh, what if what the ENFP is saying is true? Then now we have to have these list of things that would have to happen. So you'll find with SJ types that when they accept a possibility as true, they feel the need to act on it. now it's something I have to put on the list of things I have to do, and I feel obligated to attend to. And now it's stressing me out, the amount of things that we actually have to do. And this is often what you see between an SJ and an MP dynamic. The extroverted intuition user, the ENFP in this case, will be giving a bunch of ideas that they see as just talking about ideas. It's like, hey, I'm just thinking about these. Some of these are ripe and some of these aren't ripe ideas, but here are all of them. Whereas the SJ sees that as adding to their to-do list of things that they now have to do and feel responsible for. And so you see the increasing amount of stress building up on the guy on the left. It's like, if that's all true, then I have to do this, 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 and this. And then the ENFP character probably has no idea what he's doing to the other guy. So
Yeah, I will say we're obviously always showing clips of the film. In context, Wallace Shawn, the guy on the left, he was a little bit confused why his friend Andre invited him to dinner in the first place, because although they were friends, they weren't super close. Like, he had a bunch of other friends that he could have spoken to, but instead he would talk to him. So it's almost as if, as an ENFP, he wants the opinion of this SJ. He wants to know what this particular person thinks of all of his ideas and all of his experiences, because there's a whole bunch of friends he could have talked to with this. And because he's in the theatre, he probably knows a lot of NF types and a lot of abstract thinkers, but he wants someone who's like a bit different, a bit more grounded, and wants to know what this person in particular thinks of everything he's thinking right now.
Things don't affect people the way they used to. I mean, it may very well be that 10 years from now, people will pay $10,000 in cash to be castrated just in order to be affected by something.
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, why is that? I mean, is it just because people are lazy today, or they're bored? I mean, are we just like bored, spoiled children who've just been lying in the bathtub all day, just playing with their plastic duck, and now they're just thinking, well, what can I do?
Okay, yes, we're bored. We're all bored now. But has it ever occurred to you, Wally, that the process that creates this boredom that we see in the world now may very well be a self-perpetuating, unconscious form of brainwashing created by a world totalitarian government based on money, and that all of this is much more dangerous than one thinks? And it's not just a question of individual survival, Wally, but that somebody who's bored is asleep, and somebody who's asleep will not say no. See, I keep meeting these people. I mean, just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. When I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert who had devoted his life to saving trees. Just got back from Washington, lobbying to save the redwoods. He's 84 years old. He always travels with a backpack because he never knows where he's going to be tomorrow. And when I met him at Findhorn, he said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, "Ah, New York. Yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers who keep talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made or to even see it as a prison." And then he went into his pocket and he took out a seed for a tree, and he said, "This is a pine tree." He put it in my hand and he said, "Escape before it's too late." See, actually, for 2 or 3 years now, Chiquita and I have had this very unpleasant feeling that we really should get out. And we really should feel like Jews in Germany in the late 30s. Get out of here. Of course, the problem is where to go, because it seems quite obvious that the whole world is going in the same direction. See, I think it's quite possible that the 1960s represented the last burst of the human being before he was extinguished, and that this is the beginning of the rest of the future now, and that from now on, there'll simply be all these robots walking around, feeling nothing, thinking nothing, and there'll be nobody left almost to remind them that there once was a species called a human being with feelings and thoughts, and that history and memory are right now being erased, and soon nobody will really remember that life existed on the planet. Now, of course, Bjornstrand feels that there's really almost no hope, and that we're probably going back to a very savage, lawless, terrifying period. Findhorn people see it a little differently. They're feeling that there'll be these pockets of light springing up in different parts of the world, and that these will be, in a way, invisible planets on this planet. And that as we, or the world, grow colder, we can take invisible space journeys to these different planets, refuel for what it is we need to do on the planet itself, and come back. And it's their feeling that there have to be centers now where people can come and reconstruct a new future for the world. And when I was talking to Gustav Bjornstrand, he was saying that actually these centers are growing up everywhere now. And the way they're trying to do, which is what Finhorn was trying to do, and in a way, what I was trying to do. I mean, these things can't be given names, but in a way, these are all attempts at creating a new kind of school or a new kind of monastery. And Bjornstrand talks about the concept of reserves, islands of safety, where history can be remembered and the human being can continue to function in order to maintain the species through a dark age. In other words, we're talking about an underground, which did exist in a different way during the Dark Ages among the mystical orders of the church. And the purpose of this underground is to find out how to preserve the light, life, the culture, how to keep things living. You see, I keep thinking that what we need is a new language, a language of the heart, languages in the Polish forest where language wasn't needed, some kind of language between people that is a new kind of poetry. That's the poetry of the dancing bee that tells us where the honey is. And I think that in order to create that language, you're going to have to learn how you can go through a looking glass into another kind of perception where you have that sense of being united to all things, and suddenly you understand everything.
So as you can see with the guy on the right, he is talking about the language of the heart, which could potentially be showing the introverted feeling there, and also the sense of returning to oneness, which is a very NF-ish belief for a lot of ENFPs to have. The let's all share the language of the heart and sing songs and have kumbaya kind of belief that you'll see some of them have. And so yeah, I'll leave it to Jonathan. But I wanted to ask you something. The guy on the left, is there any chance that he could be INFP because of his propensity to ask why? Because there's FISI there, but like
I considered that, but the next thing we're going to see, I think we'll settle it.
okay, got it.
Yeah. A character who seems very SJ, but at the same time he is involved in the arts, he is involved in theatre. So that by itself might bring out more of the introverted feeling and more of the intuition that is typical for an SJ. I'll also say that, according to the actor, because these actors also wrote this whole story, the actor says that this is not himself. They do share the names of their characters. They say this is not himself. This is actually based on the kind of roles that he kept being typecasted as and kept being casted as by producers in other films. And he was getting a little bit sick and tired of it. So this is like a way of venting his frustration at the kind of characters he was forced to play. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So now it's Andre's turn to be a bit paranoid. Like before, Wallace Shawn was talking about his fears of and how he felt like people were looking down on him and treating him like a dog and stuff. Now, Andre, though, he's talking about his fears that they're living a totalitarian nightmare and that everyone's becoming a robot. It's a very intuitive sort of fear. It's also a very feeling sort of fear. The fear that you're losing touch of your emotions and that everything's becoming more mechanized and automated and everything's to try to control and all about money. Things that NFs generally don't value quite so much until they're broke. So there's more a sense that he wants people to feel, he wants people to be more emotional and more in touch with their feelings and to think about bigger ideas. And he fears that, well, he is also a bit optimistic, though he does think that instead of everything becoming very bleak, there's always going to be these little pockets of hope all over the world. And also, one thing I noticed is he's not necessarily saying these are his ideas or these things that he knows. He's saying these are his thoughts. It's like, this is what I think happens, or this is what this expert I've listened to, this physicist I met, this is what he thinks happened. So he's like, again, he wants Wallace Shawn's character to give him feedback. The whole conversation, the whole movie is about an ENFP wanting feedback from his more grounded friend because he has all these wacky ideas in his head. He's had this midlife crisis and he kind of wants to like test them and see how they hold up with a more rational, grounded person. Because Andre, he does think deeply and philosophically about all kinds of different things, but he's also talking a lot about the people he's met and the answers he's been given by other people. So that could point to a certain uncertainty about his ideas.
Are you ready for some dessert?
I think I'll just have an espresso. Thank you.
I'll also have one. Thank you. And could I also have an amaretto?
Certainly, sir.
Thank you.
You see, Wally, there's this incredible building that they built at Findhorn. The man who designed it had never designed anything in his life. He wrote children's books. And some people wanted it to be a sort of hall of meditation, and others wanted it to be a kind of lecture hall. But the psychic part of the community wanted it to serve another function as well, because they wanted it to be a kind of spaceship, which at night could rise up and let the UFOs know that this was a safe place to land, and that they would find friends there. So the problem was, because it needed a massive kind of roof, was how to have a roof that would stay on the building, but at the same time be able to fly up at night and meet the flying sources. So the architect meditated and meditated, and he finally came up with a very simple solution of not actually joining the roof to the building, which means that it should fall off, because they have great gales up in northern Scotland. So to keep it from falling off, he got beach stones from the beach, or we did, because I worked on this building, all up and down the roof, just like that. And the idea was that the energy that would flow from stone to stone would be so strong, you see, that it would keep the roof down under any conditions. But at the same time, if the roof needed to go up, it'd be light enough to go up. Well, it works, you see. Now, architects don't know why it works, and it shouldn't work, because it should fall off. But it works. It does work. The gales blow and the roof should fall off, but it doesn't fall off.
I don't know what to say, except yes, Northern Scotland does have some very strong gales. He is correct there.
Scotland man approves.
Yep. Well, do you want to know my actual response to all this? I mean, do you want to hear my actual response?
Yes.
See, my actual response, I mean, I'm just trying to survive, you know? I mean, I'm just trying to earn a living, just trying to pay my rent and my bills. I mean, I live my life. I enjoy staying home with Debbie. I'm reading Charlton Heston's autobiography, and that's that. I mean, occasionally maybe Debbie and I will step outside. We'll go to a party or something. And if I can occasionally get my little talent together and write a little play, well, then that's just wonderful. And I mean, I enjoy reading about other little plays people have written, and reading the reviews of those plays and what people said about them and what people said about what people said. And I mean, I have a list of errands and responsibilities that I keep in a notebook. I enjoy going through the notebook, carrying out the responsibilities, doing the errands, and crossing them off the list. And I mean, I just don't know how anybody could enjoy anything more than I enjoy reading Charlton Heston's autobiography, or getting up in the morning and having the cup of cold coffee that's been waiting for me all night, still there for me to drink in the morning, and no cockroach or fly has died in it overnight. I mean, I'm just so thrilled when I get up and I see that coffee there just the way I wanted it. I mean, I just can't imagine how anybody could enjoy something else any more than that. I mean, obviously, if there is a dead cockroach in it, well, then I just have a feeling of disappointment and I'm sad. But I mean, I just don't think I feel the need for anything more than all this. Whereas, you seem to be saying that it's inconceivable that anybody could be having a meaningful life today, and everyone is totally destroyed, and then we all need to live in these outposts. But I mean, I just can't believe, even for you, I mean, don't you find, isn't it pleasant just to get up in the morning and there's Chiquita, there are the children, the Times is delivered, you can read it. I mean, maybe you'll direct a play, maybe you won't direct a play, but forget about the play that you may or may not direct. Why is it necessary to, why not lean back and just enjoy these details? I mean, and there'd be a delicious cup of coffee and a piece of coffee cake. I mean, why is it necessary to have more than this, or to even think about having more than this? I mean, I don't really know what you're talking about. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I don't really know what you're talking about. And I mean, even if I were to totally agree with you, and even if I were to accept the idea that there's just no way for anybody to have personal happiness now, well, I still couldn't accept the idea that the way to make life wonderful would be to just totally, reject Western civilization and fall back into some kind of belief in some kind of weird something. I mean, I don't even know how to begin talking about this, but in the Middle Ages, before the arrival of scientific thinking as we know it today, well, people could believe anything. Anything could be true. The statue of the Virgin Mary could speak or bleed or whatever it was. But the wonderful thing that happened was that then in the development of science in the Western world, well, certain things did come slowly to be known and understood. I mean, Obviously, all ideas in science are constantly being revised. I mean, that's the whole point. But we do at least know that the universe has some shape and order, and that, trees do not turn into people or goddesses. And there are very good reasons why they don't. And you can't just believe absolutely anything. Whereas the things that you're talking about, I mean, you found the handprint in the book, and there were 3 Andres and 1 Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and to me, that is a coincidence. But and then, the people who put that book together, well, they had their own reasons for putting it together. But to you, it was significant, as if that book had been written 40 years ago so that you would see it, as if it was planned for you in a way. I mean, really, all right, let's say, if I get a fortune cookie in a Chinese restaurant, of course, even I have a tendency, of course, I would hardly throw it out. I read it, and I just instinctively sort of, if it says something like a conversation with a dark-haired man will be very important for you, well, I just instinctively think, who do I know who has dark hair? Did we have a conversation? What did we talk about? In other words, there's something in me that makes me read it, and I instinctively interpret it as if it were an omen of the future. But in my conscious opinion, which is so fundamental to my whole view of life, I would just have to change totally to not have this opinion. In my conscious opinion, this is simply something that was written in the cookie factory several years ago, and in no way refers to me. The fact that I got, the man who wrote it did not know anything about me. He could not have known anything about me. There's no way that this cookie could actually have to do with me. And the fact that I've gotten it is just basically a joke. And if I were going to go on a trip on an airplane and I got a fortune cookie that said, don't go, of course, I admit I might feel a bit nervous for about 1 second, but in fact, I would go because, that trip is going to be successful or unsuccessful based on the state of the airplane and the state of the pilot, and the cookie is in no position to know about that. And it's the same with any kind of prophecy or a sign or an omen, because if you believe in omens, then that means that the universe, I don't even know how to begin to describe this. That means that the future is somehow sending messages backwards to the present. Which means that the future must exist in some sense already in order to be able to send these messages. And it also means that things in the universe are there for a purpose, to give us messages, whereas I think that things in the universe are just there. They don't mean anything. If the turtle's egg falls out of the tree and splashes on the paving stones, it's just because that turtle was clumsy by accident. And to decide whether to send my ships off to war on the basis of that seems a big mistake to me.
Well, what information would you send your ships to war on? Because if it's all meaningless, what's the difference whether you accept the fortune cookie or the statistics of the Ford Foundation? Doesn't seem to matter.
Well, the meaningless fact of the fortune cookie or the turtle's egg can't possibly have any relevance to the subject you're analyzing. Whereas a group of meaningless facts that are collected and interpreted in a scientific way may quite possibly be relevant. Because the wonderful thing about scientific theories about things is that they're based on experiments that can be repeated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you can see here, it seems like the guy on the left is really content with the way that life is. And he's basically telling the guy on the right, you think too much. Why do you think so much? Think less. And he's like, life is simple. Enjoy the little details of life. I'm fully content with life as it is. I don't need anything else for it to be better. And you seem like you think that people can't be happy the way that things are right now. There's a restlessness to you. But for me, I don't experience that at all. I'm happy. I'm content. And so you can also see some of the introverted sensing, dominant, wondering why the other guy is making such a big deal out of things that are not real. It's like, and he's trying to tell the other guy, what you're thinking is not real. Then why are you spending so much time thinking about this when it ultimately doesn't matter? And I trust what's scientific. And he talks about his to-do list, and I like being able to check off my to-do list. You could make the case for extroverted thinking there. And I'm content with the creature comforts of life. Why are you making me question everything when it's not going to really change anything? And I don't really believe in what you're saying because it can't be provable. How can I know it if I can't see it, hear it, touch it? It's just like a fortune cookie. It's not really going to influence my life in any sort of way. So you can see the guy on the left, he both is intrigued by what the other guy says because of the aspirational extroverted intuition, but he's also dismissive too. And he's like, come on, you gotta be kidding me that you think this is real. And so.
Yeah, you see again a bit more panicking of this. He is intrigued, but the full implications are unnerving to him by his own admission. Like, he doesn't like the idea that it's not just doesn't believe there's greater significance to all these things that are happening to fortune cookies or strange events is that he doesn't want to believe it. It actually disturbs him to think that someone who wrote a fortune cookie was thinking of him and knew about him. He's panicking at the very thought that someone could possibly know things about him outside of his control. He likes the idea that everything there is to know is knowable right now, or mostly knowable right now. He likes to think of himself as a very rational person. And he says actually that he'd have to completely change himself entirely to not think of himself as a rational person. And this is where he's showing signs of being possibly an INFP at times throughout this conversation, but on balance of evidence, it's more likely he is an SJ that has just perhaps a lot more in contact with his NF side just because of the profession he's in. This last come at the end really does perfectly encapsulate a sort of SJ versus NP conversation where the SJ is intrigued for a while, but also thinks it's kind of crazy and nonsensical and even a bit scary. And he just doesn't like the idea that things are out of his control or that things can't be knowable through scientific and reason. That also suggests he's a bit more of an ISTJ rather than an ISFJ, just because an ISFJ would be a bit more open to strange, unknowable, unusual things. They'd be somewhat skeptical, but they wouldn't be so skeptical to the point where they panic at the idea of mystical forces beyond their control being out there. It can happen, but it's usually the STs that are more skeptical of this stuff than the SFs. So My Dinner with Andre, there should be a link in the description. It's a good movie to watch all the way through. So this has been an example of us typing two fictional characters. We have a course going in June, Action, Typology, and Fiction. We'd really love for you to join. There should be a link in the comments, and we look forward to doing more of this in the future and seeing y'all next time.
See y'all later. Take care.
Bye.